Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Great. Today we're going way back to ancient India.
Okay.
Yeah, roughly between, say, 600 BCE and 600 CE.
Sounds good.
It's going to be a fascinating look into how people back then navigated things like family and social hierarchies.
Right.
We'll be drawing on stories and legal texts.
Oh, interesting.
And even some inscriptions to try and understand this world.
Wow, sounds like a pretty rich mix of sources.
It really is. And one of the most important ones is this epic poem, this huge story with over 100,000 verses.
Wow, 100,000.
It's amazing. It's been passed down for generations.
I bet it has a lot to say about social life.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's full of these kings and battles and intricate family dramas that reveal so much.
You know, what's really fascinating about these kinds of epics is that they're not just historical records, you know?
Right.
They also reflect the values and beliefs of the people who composed them.
So it's like we're getting a glimpse into their worldview.
Exactly.
So let's start with something fundamental to any society family. And specifically, I'm struck by how important patrilineage was.
Oh, yeah, patrilineage, tracing lineage through the male line.
Right, and it's everywhere. And the epic in legal texts like the Manusmriti.
It was absolutely central back then. It wasn't just family trees.
Right.
It was about power, inheritance, land, even the right to rule.
It all went through the male line.
It seems that way, yeah.
It makes you think about the implications for women.
Definitely.
Where did that leave daughters in this system?
That's a really good question. A lot of historians are still trying to figure that out.
I see.
I mean, the Manusmriti is pretty clear about a patriarchal system.
Okay.
You know, defining a woman's role mainly in relation to her father or husband.
Right.
But there are some hints of complexity.
Really? Like what?
Well, for example, there's this concept of stridhana.
Stridhana?
Yeah, it means woman's wealth.
Interesting.
And the Manusmriti acknowledges a woman's right to keep gifts she received at her marriage, and even to pass them down to her kids.
So she had some control over property.
It seems that way, but of course there are also caveats and restrictions.
I can imagine.
It shows us that power dynamics were, well, always at play.
So it's like this push and pull between acknowledging a woman's right to property, but then trying to limit it too.
Yeah, and these texts weren't just describing social practices. They were often tools to, shape behavior, especially for women.
So speaking of shaping behavior, let's talk about marriage. The Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras.
Okay.
They were very specific about the right way to get married.
Oh, yeah, the proper conduct of marriage was hugely important back then.
I can imagine.
They outlined different types of marriage, some more desirable than others.
Really?
And they even had specific rules about who could marry whom.
I wonder how much choice women had in this system.
Yeah, that's crucial to consider. It seems like the father had a big role in deciding.
I see.
But we have to be careful not to impose our modern ideas onto the past.
Right, like romantic love and individual choice.
Exactly. So within their context, women may have found ways to exert their own will, you know?
It's like trying to decipher a code. We have these official rules, but the lived experience might be hidden between the lines.
That makes studying history so captivating.
It really is. We're always piecing together fragments.
Trying to figure out not just what happened, but why and how it affected real people.
And speaking of piecing things together,
Okay.
let's move on to another big part of early Indian society.
Hi.
The caste system, a topic that's often oversimplified, you know.
Oh, for sure. It's incredibly complex.
And to really understand it,
Yeah.
we have to go beyond those basic textbook definitions.
Right, those 4 varnas.
Yeah, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras.
Exactly.
It's easy to get caught up in the hierarchy, with the Brahmanas, the priests at the top, and the Shudras, the laborers at the bottom.
But was it really that rigid in a practice?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is, because while texts like the Dharma Shastras lay out the ideal order, the reality might have been much more fluid.
You know, it's like those cooking shows. Everything looks perfect on camera,
right?
But behind the scenes, there's lots of improvising.
I get it.
And one key to understanding this complexity is Jadis.
Jadis.
Yeah, the subcaste.
Oh, right.
They were more localized groups based on occupation and kinship.
So a nested system, like within the bigger varnas.
Exactly. And we see this in inscriptions, like one from a silk weaver's guild. They migrated as a community, but not everyone stuck to their traditional jobs.
So there was room for flexibility even within the caste system.
It seems that way. It wasn't this unchangeable structure.
Interesting.
We see social mobility, people pursuing different things.
It definitely challenges the idea that it was static.
Yeah, this is making me rethink the caste system. It's way more dynamic than I thought.
And we haven't even talked about those outside the framework.
Oh, right, the Mlekas.
Exactly, the outsiders.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It is, because it makes us ask, were boundaries really that rigid?
Great question. And how did these different communities actually interact?
It seems like we're just starting to uncover this complex landscape.
I can't wait to dive deeper. There's so much more to discover.
I agree. This deep dive is just getting started.
So we were talking about these Mlekas, the outsiders.
Right, those who didn't quite fit into that grammatical framework.
Yeah, who were these people exactly?
Well, the term was pretty broad, you know?
Hmm.
It included nomadic people, those speaking different languages,
Okay.
and those with different religious practices.
So basically anyone outside the norm?
In a way, yeah, it definitely reflects a grammatical perspective, you know, that us versus them kind of thinking.
But it wasn't always about complete exclusion, right?
True, there was interaction and even integration sometimes.
Like we talked about Ridradaman.
Oh, yeah, the Shaka
He
ruler.
rebuilt that irrigation project.
And even had his inscription in Sanskrit?
It's like those membranes in biology. They seem impermeable, but they're actually porous.
I like that analogy.
It shows that boundaries are always being negotiated.
Redefined through all sorts of interactions.
And even conflicts sometimes.
Exactly.
And then there's Gautamiputra Sirisatakani.
Oh, the Satavahana ruler, he's a fascinating case.
He's full of contradictions.
Definitely. He claimed to uphold the Varna order,
Okay.
but then he married into a Shaka family, considered Mukkas.
And let's not forget the metronymics.
Right, those names derive from the mother.
Seems to contradict the emphasis on patronymic.
It's like he's playing with those social categories.
Using them to his advantage, maybe.
Could be. It definitely suggests strategic maneuvering, you know, using norms to consolidate power.
While also acknowledging a diverse society.
Exactly. It shows that individuals could manipulate the system.
They weren't just passive recipients.
Right. They could be quite active.
And this brings us to the Buddhists.
Okay.
They challenged the Brahmanical view, right?
They did. They had a very different take on social hierarchy.
So how did they approach it?
Well, they recognized social differences, of course, but they didn't see them as rigid or determined by birth.
So everyone had potential, regardless of their status.
Exactly. Everyone had the potential for enlightenment.
Interesting. Do we see this reflected in their stories?
We do. There's one about a wealthy Shudra
Okay.
who gains respect from people of all Varnas, even Brahmanas.
So true worth isn't about birth, but your actions and character.
That's the message. It challenges the basis of social hierarchy.
And the Buddhists also had this idea of a social contract.
Right. People choosing to be governed in exchange for security.
Sounds like a modern idea.
It is, suggesting that social structures are human-made.
And therefore, changeable.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder how these ideas spread and influence things.
Well, early India wasn't a single unified culture.
Of course.
There were all these different schools of thought, debates, traditions.
It's like a tapestry woven from many threads.
A good way to put it.
But within this tapestry, there were also darker shades.
True, groups marginalized, facing hardship.
Even in a society that valued generosity, right?
Sadly, yes, there were those deemed untouchable.
The grammatical tests made a clear distinction.
Between pure and polluting.
And this idea of purity was tied to rituals.
Exactly. Those handling polluting things were pushed to the margins.
Their presence was seen as a threat.
To ritual purity, yes, and it really impacted their social standing.
It's hard to imagine the kind of exclusion they faced.
Forced to live outside villages, wear certain clothes.
And use discarded things.
It's a difficult aspect of this history.
It really makes you question how such treatment was justified.
Well, the Manusmriti is clear about their duties, emphasizing their separation and subordination.
But was there any resistance?
That's possible. We can't assume everyone just accepted things.
Right. Individuals might have subverted those norms.
Or found ways to exercise agency within the system.
It's so important to look beyond those official narratives.
Absolutely. To find those hidden stories.
Marginalized voices.
To get a more complete picture of the past.
This deep dive is really changing my perspective.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's much more multifaceted than I initially thought.
It's the beauty of historical inquiry. Yeah.
Peeling back those layers.
Measuring the richness and complexity.
But with all this complexity, how do we make sense of it?
That's where the historian's tools come in.
Okay.
We analyze each source, consider its context, its language.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
With pieces from different times and places.
And sometimes those pieces don't quite fit.
True, especially with a text as layered as this epic.
It's not a single story, right?
No, it's a compilation of stories, teachings, philosophy.
Evolving over centuries.
Scholars believe it started with charioteer bards.
Okay.
Who sang about warriors and battles.
So it was an oral tradition first.
It seems that way, and later others started writing it down.
Adding their own interpretations.
And it kept evolving even after it was written.
Different versions reflecting the diversity of India.
Exactly. So we're not just reading a story.
But engaging with centuries of history.
Exactly.
It's amazing that it continues to fascinate people today.
It really is.
It makes me wonder what we'd ask the authors if we could.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. What comes to your mind?
Maybe how they reconciled the ideal social order with the real-life complexities they saw.
That's a good one, getting to that tension between theory and practice.
What about you? What would you ask?
I think I'd ask about the role of stories themselves.
Okay.
Did they see themselves as just recording events?
Or were they actively shaping people's thinking?
That's a powerful question. It's relevant even today.
It is the power of narratives to shape our understanding
of ourselves and our place in the world.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring with you.
We've covered so much, but it's just the beginning.
There's always more to discover.
And for our listeners, we invite you to join the conversation.
What question would you ask those ancient storytellers?
Share your thoughts, keep diving deep, and until next time, take care. It really is amazing the power of these stories being passed down for centuries.
It's like throwing a pebble in a pond,
Okay.
The ripples just keep spreading outward.
Touching our lives even today.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how those ripples change.
Right, as they encounter different interpretations.
Different cultures, different shores.
You mentioned how the epic has been retold in so many ways.
It's like a chameleon, constantly adapting
to its surroundings.
Yeah, and each version reveals something about the people retelling it.
Okay.
Take, for example, Mahashweta Devi, the Bengali writer.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of her. She's known for her social commentary.
Exactly, giving voice to the marginalized, challenging power structures.
In her writing, she actually reimagines an episode from the epic.
It's called Kunti and the Nishadi.
Can you remind me of the original episode?
Sure. It's the one where the Pandava brothers are tricked
into
staying in a house made of lac, which their enemies want to burn down.
Oh, right, but their mother, Kunti, helps them escape.
Right, through a tunnel, but tragically, a Nishadi woman and her 5 sons are also there.
And they die in the fire.
Yes, and the epic just moves on, focusing on the hero.
But Desi pauses the narrative.
She does. She shines a light on the Nishadi woman.
Who's basically silenced in the original.
Exactly. She's giving a voice to the voiceless.
So we see the human cost of the Pandavas' victory.
Exactly. And in Devi's version, Kuti is haunted by those deaths.
It's not just a simple escape anymore.
No, she grapples with the weight of survival, the moral implications.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just about kings and heroes.
There are always other stories, other perspectives.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's challenged so many of my assumptions.
It's about peeling back those layers, uncovering the complexity.
But with all this complexity, how do we even begin to understand it all?
It's an ongoing process, like a conversation.
A conversation with the past.
Exactly, and with each other, constantly discovering and reinterpreting.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely, and we invite you, our listeners, to join this conversation.
If you could go back in time and ask those ancient storytellers one question,
what would it be?
What would you want to know about social life back then?
Share your thoughts with us. Keep those conversations going.
Keep diving deep. And until next time, take care.